Well, we're starting without you because it's 4 o'clock and we have a quorum.
That's it.
So, I'm going to call the Finance Committee meeting to order for, what's today, the 5th
It is.
of March, 4 o'clock. So, this is the final meeting of our process until right before town meeting. So, we had some minutes in our packet. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is anybody in the mood to approve those, or do you want to wait it for a couple of weeks and we do the rest of them together?
The motion to adopt.
I just, I wanted to make one clarification that Henry Sanford is marked as attending one of the meetings. I'm quite certain.
That he's MIA?
I don't remember the date, but I know he wasn't there.
All in favor?
Thank you, Steve. Any other corrections? All in favor of approval?
Aye.
Thank you. We have a few articles to finish up, and today was also going to be devoted to finishing the housing articles. I know Tobias is going to be here. Tucker is here, and I know we have at least Article 6 and Article 21 that we need to bring back at the request of the town for some changes. I believe we have somebody in the audience who would like us to consider bringing another article back, which we'll hear about. And so anyway, I think before we get started, and Tucker, you can fill in where I may be a little bit of not have all the information, but I believe the town is asking that the Nantucket article be moved to take no action, owing principally to the failure of the ownership interest to perform certain activities that were a predicate for the town considering this as a project for a town meeting. So do I have that substantially correct, or?
Absolutely.
So I think with Tucker's assent and the committee's assent, we're not going to spend time talking about the Nantucket Inn today. So,
David, sorry.
Yeah, please jump in.
Just briefly, I just want to mention we left some information for you all that is from the consultant Kevin McGuire. That is follow up to the questions that came up at the last session. But as David pointed out, the seller of the property, in order for this to even possibly be considered and have a cogent discussion at town meeting, needed to perform certain things by certain dates, and they have not delivered. So we like your recommendation.
Okay. So given that we're on that topic, can I get somebody to make a motion, move a motion to...
I'll make the motion to take no action on the article.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Tucker, thank you. Brooke, thank you very much. Town folks, thank you very much for...
Yeah, we got-
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Tucker, just or for Brooke or anybody, is this likely to become an opportunity at a future, at a special town meeting, or is this, have we just reached an impasse with the owner?
I wouldn't. It could become it could become a future opportunity. We've said to the owner, basically, you've missed your window as far as Springtown meeting goes, and us being able to do the kind of due diligence and spend the kind of money that we need to spend with experts to really have an informed discussion at town meeting. However, you know how to reach us if you're still interested, and it could be taken up at a future town meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks.
So again, thank you for the efforts you guys have put in. I know it's been pretty hectic and you've done a lot of work. So hopefully won't all be for naught. So thanks very much. Public comment, Mr. Atherton.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Rick Atherton, and I'm here to ask you to reconsider your recommendation on Article 83. And Article 83 is a article brought by Steve Cohen on behalf of his clients. And essentially what it's attempting to do is to, as I look at it, to remove from town meeting the current authority that's rested in town meeting under 67E. And 67E, because I did watch your meeting and your discussion on this article, and I think there are a number of things that could be helpful to you as you go forward, if you're willing to reconsider. And in that regard, I would mention that the amendment to 67E is still at the Attorney General, and it really doesn't have, in my judgment, any impact on Article 83, whether the amendment is approved by the Attorney General or not. When that amendment went to the special town meeting, the recommendation by the Finance Committee in the warrant was you would bring your recommendation to town meeting, and you ultimately recommend that the amendment be adopted. And I think there's an assumption here in 67E, and let me just read it to you. Except as provided in paragraph C, which isn't effective, leasing or licensing any town-owned coastal land for private erosion control protection purposes shall be subject to approval by a vote at an annual or special town meeting. And to me, I think that town meeting, when it adopted E in 2012, the expectation of the voters were that they would know, if not every term exactly, they would have a good feel for what the terms of any license or lease were, and therefore reserve the ability to approve that license at town meeting. That was the intent of the amendment to Article 67 in the first place. And that amendment has not changed until we get to Article 83. And Article 83 doesn't really say, I want to amend 67E. It just says, I'm asking town meeting to give the authority to the Board of Selectmen to negotiate a lease under the few terms they add to it. And 67E, in effect, would be a moot article because the town meeting would have acted in accordance with 83. I don't think that's what town meeting ought to do. I think we're better off to have some ways, and I'll just give you a couple for examples. I think there are a lot of potential financial consequences to the expansion of the project from 900 to nearly 4,000 feet. If the project is approved, and if it turns out it's not performing as it's supposed to, and there are damage to upstream or downstream properties, the financial liability is substantial. And if SBPF's insurance policy doesn't cover that, I think you can be assured the next party in line will be the town. So that's an example where I think the terms of such indemnification provisions ought to be available to town meetings so we all understand whether or not proper coverage is being negotiated on behalf of the citizens in any license that comes forward. I think your discussion the other day wasn't full enough to, in my judgment, to support a recommendation of the article as it is. So I'm not prepared today, I wish I was, to have a specific recommendation for you, but I would ask that you reconsider by not having just a broad support of the article, that you'd hold and make a recommendation at town meeting when we have some more time to talk about the real issues here. So,
Great, thank you. So, going to have a discussion about this. Does anybody want to make a formal motion to bring it back for?
I would. I will make a formal motion to reconsider this. Somebody also approached me. I looked at this and what we voted, and I went back and looked at what we voted at the town meeting in the fall, and we contradicted ourselves. So I think that I think I was confused when we discussed this original article. And when I went back and looked at the vote we took at the special town meeting, we supported this. And so this amendment just goes to undo what we voted for unanimously in the fall.
Okay. Is there anybody who will second Joanna's vote to motion to reconsider?
I'll second it.
Okay. Any other comments?
Yeah, I don't recall the original article, so it's hard to.
Well, I think that Mr. Atherton just told us what was in the article, which I think the issue is it a town meeting? Was the original article that was approved intended for town meeting to approve the terms of the lease?
Right.
Versus giving the select board the authority to negotiate the lease, which is what this article.
But also it was an amendment, and the amendment had the term of the years had expired. And so essentially we were voting on the amendment. And so this sort of just undoes the vote that we took in the fall.
Well, isn't this the appropriate venue to have the discussion about undoing the action of a previous town meeting?
Yeah.
I thought it was folly to begin with to take the power away from the Board of Selectmen. That's why I voted the way I did. And, meaning 2 weeks ago, not in the fall or years ago. And, I'll continue to vote that way. I think this power lies with the Board of Selectmen, or rightfully should. It doesn't today, but I think it should.
And not with the town meeting.
And not with town meeting.
Go ahead.
Just one more point to help in this discussion. When it comes to leases, let's remind ourselves that leases have to go to town meeting to lease town property. Unless, and this is by a town bylaw, the term of the lease is under 5 years. And I'm troubled when the town, to be frank, gets around those kinds of issues by issuing a license. And sometimes it's helpful to be a little extreme, and you can imagine all the possible licenses the board could issue to get around the restrictions on leasing, which I think are there for a purpose. Town property, its buildings, its vacant land. The citizens wish to weigh in on any disposition of that property. And the only way to do that when you lease it is if it's under 5 years. Then that's why, for example, the jetties concession, the people want to make sure they have a lease long enough term to amortize their investment, but it doesn't come to town meeting because it terminates at 5 years. A license should not get around that. So that's another way to think about this.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if the license negotiated by the board had a termination, that might be one other way they could deal with this. All the licenses until the last one negotiated by the Board of Selectmen for this project had termination dates in those licenses. The one exception is the more recent license for the 900-foot project, which has no termination date.
I don't have it with me, but didn't the town attorney give us an opinion on this? What was his opinion? I don't remember.
I did not bring that with me. You don't remember?
He may have given it to form and not to substance.
I have a copy of his, happy to read his comment. The authorization of a lease or license of town-owned, I need to get my glasses out, land for a coastal erosion project -- Sconset Bluff. But he has a comment, and it's an interesting comment, which I think is probably not appropriate in retrospect. He says, approved as to form. It is assumed that the intent of this petition is to address the bylaw that was enacted at the October 10, 2018 special town meeting, which amended 67(1)E of the town code. but the Article 83 is intended to be effective whether that amendment is adopted or not. So I think the comment is a little misleading and suggests to me that more discussion would be helpful in that regard.
So we have a motion to reconsider. We have a second. Do we want to vote and then have more discussion on the reconsideration, or do we not have enough votes to reconsider?
I'd like to, either way, I'd like to get it clarified. I mean, town meeting voted on how many years ago, so they could have a say in this, and it seems like we keep going back and forth. We should get our money back from half these lawyers, because they keep saying, oh, this word is wrong, this interpretation is wrong, just like the word structure in other articles. And it just keeps going on and on. I think it's kind of an insult to the town meeting that we continue to, backdoor these articles and say this is what this means, and then we find it doesn't mean that.
I mean, I would say that the town meeting voted to support this in 2012, again in 2018. We voted, our committee, to support this. And the specific thing that sticks in my mind is about the lease of this particular property in Sconset, and that there's a reason why it should be voted on the town meeting floor, because it's a significant piece of property. And the article that's before us to vote on is by a particular client of an attorney who's put forth this as a way of negating what twice was voted for at town meeting.
I also look at it, though, that the select board is elected by the citizens of Nantucket to do their best on the behalf
I
of
agree.
Nantucket.
I agree with that.
So I do not believe that this is trying to get a fast one pulled over on the select board.
I just see this as a bigger issue than some of the other things, right? And we've had discussion in our group before with regard to leases, and there's been some leases that we haven't liked that the town of Nantucket has gotten involved with that may not have gone through on the town meeting floor had there been the opportunity to discuss them.
What's an example of that? Because we just heard that all leases longer than 5 years have to be approved at town meeting.
What about the lease on the Academy Hill building that got renewed for the 99 years?
So that was approved by town meeting.
Was it? I don't know that.
It was. That's why we discussed it, because it went to town meeting.
We didn't discuss it at this committee. It wasn't a citizens article.
No, we did. We authorized the Board of Selectmen to negotiate an extension of that lease.
Right.
Meaning town meeting did. I don't remember how this committee voted. I know how I voted. But town meeting did authorize the Board of Selectmen to enter into a lease without the terms known, which is exactly what's being asked for here.
Maybe that's why town meeting voted to have a say, because they didn't seem to like the way they negotiated.
I disagree with that. I think that in all cases where there are leases, the details of the leases are ironed out, often in executive session, but usually by the Board of Selectmen, the Select Board.
But you have a particular issue with that lease, which I agree with, right? They've repeatedly come back and asked us for money for something that we think is their responsibility, and we keep paying for it.
And yet I think that the Select Board is the appropriate venue for leases to be negotiated. The specific terms of leases can't be bandied about in an afternoon or at an evening with 400 people in the audience with varying degrees of information.
That part is true, except for, I agree with that, except for that maybe though it should be just full disclosure, right? Not that we don't know the terms of lease when we're voting on it.
Right. Negotiate a lease at town meeting. It's already been.
That's incorrect.
Okay.
I mean, think, if we want to use the example of Academy Hill, we didn't know all the terms. We knew some of the terms. We knew that there was an extension that was needed so that the lessee, Hal Keen, could refinance the debt.
Right.
Right, but we didn't know all the terms, and the Board of Selectmen, which is what they were called at the time, negotiated those terms after the fact. Maybe in executive session, I don't know that for sure, but that's where the negotiations were done, and that's where I think they should be done. 5 people are voted on, elected, and then they dig into all the details. I don't think you can get into that level of minutia and detail on matters of import at town meeting.
I agree.
I agree, they get
I do
into the
too.
minutia and then they bring it to town meeting and say, this is what we negotiated, yes or no.
Well,
That's what I
But they
think.
don't
that's a
do
good
that.
Theory, but that's
Of course,
not how it happens.
that's what this is what we're trying to talk about here today, is that we do negotiate this lease and bring it to town meeting and say yes or no.
Right.
Oh,
That's what
now
I
we're saying
think
we're
too.
gonna go back on that after all that work.
Right.
Seems crazy. I mean, so we bring this to town meeting and say the same thing. I just want it to be clear that we finally figure out, even last fall, I mean, we're trying to determine the changes that we made were just not changes to it. It was just wording that was incorrect. Wasn't that the story last town meeting? We weren't changing the way it was done. It was just inappropriately. It was almost like technical
Correct.
corrections.
That's correct. And the amendment was the to extend the exception of the 5 years. Right. So essentially, what we are reconsidering here is leases that are outside of that 5-year period, which I think it's a reasonable request to have the town meeting people vote on the full term of the lease, especially when 2 other town meetings have voted that they support that. Anyway.
Just want to make sure that the article is clear to town meeting what they're doing. Again,
Right. And I guess I think what we maybe are all agreeing on is that it's not, because we didn't read it that way when we first voted on this. Now Rick's coming forward and saying that it's not, that this is confusing the issue.
I don't see it as confusing the issue. You know, what we're talking about is amending a section of the bylaw that says leasing or licensing of any town-owned coastal land shall be subject to approval by vote at annual or special town meeting. This is how that's done. You know, you're not going to see a 60-page lease with all the terms hammered out. That's for the Conservation Commission and for the Select Board to negotiate. This is the venue, or this is the process you go through where you say, town meeting, do you want to authorize your Select Board and Conservation Commission to hammer out the details of the lease, or do not? This is when you get the opportunity to vote thumbs up or thumbs down. And if you're wholly against the idea of leasing the property, then vote no on the article. You know, this isn't an end run. This is the process that we set up.
And I think the only, I agree with you. And I think that what Mr. Atherton is, the point he's making is that, and perhaps Joanna and others, is the concept that the terms of the lease, once negotiated, come to town meeting, for the town meeting to see the terms. And I think that would be your position going back to at least 2012. So, I mean, it took me, I'm still in the camp of, I think that where town meeting can vote up or down on whether they want to lease the property and turn it over to the select board to negotiate.
Negotiate the details. You still, you know,
I think the intent of the prior two votes, particularly as it related to Sconset Bluff, was for town meeting to actually see the full terms of the lease.
Well, then why wasn't it written that way? Because it's clearly not written that way. It doesn't say bring the final terms. You know,
This is what the part that's confusing.
Well, I think there might be, you know, some revisionist history about, or maybe certain people wanted certain things, but what was voted on was not what is being described today. It doesn't say anywhere in the bylaw that the final terms of the lease will be presented to town meeting. And if that's the intent, then I think at special town meeting, somebody ought to include that
Make that
language in
change.
an amendment.
Okay. So, do we want to vote on reconsideration? We have a motion. We have a second. We've had some discussion.
we're trying to reconsider to make another vote. So we've voted in favor of this.
Right.
That is correct.
I'm still in favor of what we voted before. So I guess I'd be voting no to reconsider.
Well, let's see if there's any more substantive discussion. If not, I'm more than happy to move the question. All those in favor of reconsidering this article on our prior vote, say aye.
Aye.
So I know 2 people have said aye. Is that correct? All those that are opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Okay, so we're not going to reconsider our prior action. Thank you very much, Rick. Thank you very much, committee. Thank you. Tobias? Are you like wiring up and?
I'm so close. If you have anything else.
I would like to also make a motion that we reconsider Article 75. I think I sent around an email earlier about that.
Okay. Can we move through 75 quickly or?
I think so.
Okay. There's a motion on the floor to reconsider Article 75.
I don't think we took a motion.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Oh, we didn't. I'm sorry. That's right. We did.
So we didn't
No.
make a motion, so we don't have to reconsider.
No.
No.
So I can make my motion.
No, we
You just have to vote.
no, we voted this a month and a half ago.
Oh,
Right.
you're right. We did.
So we have to reconsider it.
So I am making a motion to reconsider Article 75.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
So I read through this, I took Libby's comments, and I did a little bit of research, and I think that we should make a vote to take no action and refer this to the Board of Selectmen, because I think that this work is probably best done by a consultant and not a group of volunteers. It is a lot of work. There's a lot of other precedent in other communities. It's extremely complicated. There's no dollars associated with this article. We can't allocate resources to get it done. I think that it just wouldn't work in this particular way.
Do you mean to the Board of Health?
No, I think Board of Selectmen.
Because in your email you wrote the Board of Health.
Oh, BOH, sorry. Sorry, I meant Board of Selectmen, BOS.
Select board.
Select board,
Peter. I'm
yes.
very used to this.
Right.
There's 2 of us now.
That's true.
I think that's as reasonable a compromise as we're likely to get to in the next couple of minutes. So I think as long as there's discussion being had in some venue, then this will come back, whether it's at
I agree.
next annual town meeting or next one, or, at some point, let's advance the conversation.
Right.
This isn't ready in its current form. So,
Right.
I agree, Stephen and Joanna.
So do we vote on reconsidering or do we just have it on the floor?
I think there's anything to reconsider. Is there?
Yeah, we
Let's-
did take it. Yeah, so let's vote to reconsider.
Yeah. All in favor of reconsideration?
Aye.
That carries. Any more discussion on 75? Joanna, you want to make a motion?
I make a motion that we take no action on Article 75, refer it to the Select Board, and request that they take a look at this.
Professional assistance,
Yes, professional assistance.
not a work group.
Not a work group, correct.
Second.
Libby, we don't know how to pay for this, so we're not expecting, I don't think we're expecting it get paid for in this upcoming fiscal year. But I think what we're also saying is we don't want the town to either convene a work group or take on the burden itself. That I think Joanna's making the point that a professional is required to actually
Yes.
enact this or to go through the work.
So would that be a comment? So something like maybe suggest that the article be referred to the select board.
I would go from suggest to recommends.
And further that, how do you want to
And that,
professional assistance?
and that
The significance of the workload requires a professional consultant.
well, I think it's more than that. It's isn't it the
And then-
level of the sophistication of the
Yes.
work that needs to be done.
And the fact that it should be neutral and non-biased.
Hmm.
So recommend referral to the select board with further recommendation that professional assistance be engaged to explore the
How to,
Or to make recommendations.
that's fine. Okay. So we have a take no action motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Tobias, you ready yet?
I'm ready.
All right. Just to be aware, committee, after that, we have a couple of small things to clean up. So what alchemy have you cooked up for us this afternoon?
I just wrote, I thought there was a lot of conversation about what exactly this article was, so I wrote a little two-pager with kind of where we're at as far as units goes, just because it's often talked about.
30 seconds.
Just trying to explain the article in case anybody had any questions about it. And then as far as the questions the Finance Committee had, as far as a couple different light items, and for some reason this isn't computing exactly the version that just downloaded on my USB, but I can walk you through that right now. So, you'll indulge me. So I did a couple things. One, I laid out kind of a cost per bedroom. There's 53 bedrooms in the neighborhood. I'll let you read through that one sheet first. We'll walk through.
Is Beach Plum Village Posner's development off of Beach Plum Village? Is that Posner's?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So at the end here, it says we still need 40 units. That's as of today.
That's of November 2018.
And when you say for FY27, we'll need 49 more units on top of that.
Yes, projected.
Okay.
Assuming we have continued growth like we've had over the last 10 years.
Is that how the SHI requirement is calculated? I thought it was on a decennial basis.
Say that again?
I thought that it was on the 10-year census. That's when the requirement for SHI units was recalculated.
So I think that's what the number's trying to get at.
So, since Tucker's here, maybe we can ask, is fiscal year 2027 the year that we're going to have a reassessment of the number of year-round housing units on Nantucket?
Fiscal 2027.
That's, yes,
Uh,
that's the question.
that wouldn't correspond to what my understanding would be. The number is derived following it in the year following the decennial census, so 2021, 2031.
Okay.
So Tobias, where did the 27 come from?
So from that came from 2017.
Plus 10.
There was a follow-up from the housing needs assessment. That number was plugged in just for a little context.
Got it.
Okay, so that might be the theoretical need, but in 2027, we'll still be operating on whatever the number is set from the 2020 census.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Tobias, you talk about it being executed by the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and yet everyone's volunteer on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So I'm asking how would this actually work? Who's going to do the work that goes with this?
Well, so the Affordable Housing Trust Fund has a lot of the.
Tobias, can I just recommend that you get a microphone for everybody at home?
Thank you, Stephen.
So, in my mind, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund has the most flexibility legislatively to act out, whether it's deed restrictions or purchasing units in various capacities. So they make kind of the most sense in that regard. When Rick Atherton and I originally drafted the article, we drafted the language to be as such as, the board could assign another entity, a third party, create a new commission, hire a consultant to oversee it. But we thought for clarity, moving forward, it would make the most sense, since the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is engaged in this process. It would make the most sense, and also Tucker Highland is our housing consultant and would be, there to advise moving forward.
Thank you.
Do you want to say something? Yeah.
Hi, Brooke Moore, currently Vice Chair of the Affordable Housing Trust. We are planning to execute whatever the voters send our way based on the warrant articles that are on, whether, the Nantucket Inn is now tentatively off the table. But we are already strategizing how we would implement this were it to pass. So we are fully prepared to execute, and I think that we have allocated in our budget for this fiscal year a substantial amount of money for operating expenses for the trust in anticipation of perhaps needing consultants or professionals to help execute what the voters send our way. So I would say that while we are volunteers, we don't expect to actually do this ourselves, but to engage the professionals that would be needed to execute and run such a program, and that we would utilize the funding that's in the pipeline to get that done. So we're sort of already thinking in terms of this now, and we did have a financial ask of $3 million that grew to $5 million with the CPC bonding idea. So I think that we would have the bandwidth and the flexibility financially and time-wise to make it work if it came about. I wouldn't think that would be a reason not to do it if the voters sent this our way. So,
But Brooke, 4 of you are your term expires this year on the Affordable Housing Trust out of the 7.
Yep, and I'm hoping I'll be reappointed, as are several other folks that I know of. So, and just so you know, we also have one of our implementation items is a training process for new members. So bringing people up to speed fast is on our plan as well. So just in case we have some turnover. But I think we've done, again, I'll reiterate, we've done this strategic planning process over the last 8 months and feel really well positioned to do some significant work in the coming year. So
Thank you.
thank you for your concern.
I have a question about the actual procurement of these houses. So my understanding, this might be a question for you, Brian. My understanding is that there's an appraisal done as part of the procurement process. How long, or what's the timeline from the time that the Affordable Housing Trust or the group identifies a potential house that can be purchased? What do you think the actual cycle will be? How long in order to get it to offer? Right? Because you have to have an appraisal.
I think this is realistically one of the components that has to be worked out, because under the acquisition of real estate, there are some clauses that would allow us to bypass some of the procurement in terms of advertising, depending on uniqueness of the property and whatnot. So I think that this is something that would have to be worked out when we've identified a property. But if we had to go through the advertisement and everything to do it that way, it would be probably 60 days or more, at least.
So that's worst case scenario.
Potentially worst case, or slightly or more. If we're able to do it by making an offer and having it contingent on the appraisal coming out and doing that, we could probably still do it shorter than that. But I would think that 60 days at least is what it would take, or more, depending on how it went.
That's fairly standard. I mean,
Right.
most buyers in this price range are going to need financing anyway, so they're going to need, a bank appraisal. So I don't think we're talking about logistically a much different process, or the town being at a disadvantage for the fact that it needs an appraisal.
Actually, it might even be an advantage because the money would already have been allocated.
Well, the authorization for the money is allocated
Right. That's
under
what I
this
mean.
proposal. We haven't actually borrowed the money under this proposal, and
Gotcha.
that will be a little bit of a challenge in and of itself if we're doing this one at a time, because that would mean that we'd be borrowing certain amounts and banning it. And I prefer to be doing it in larger tranches than individual home purchases one at a time. It'll delay how long we actually the pay down on the amortization if we do it one at a time. So there's some other pieces that would have to be, again, they can be worked out, but they still need to be discussed on how the best way to leverage this is if it should go forward and successfully pass town meeting in the ballot.
Okay. If I may add one thing, we have been working with Brian over the last several months on a request for interest for properties, and we've sort of defined that in anticipation, again, of this article, that we've already sort of set the groundwork for doing an RFI that would go to an RFP that might identify properties that aren't on the market that people would be interested in selling into the affordable housing pool, that they weren't ready to sell, or that we could time out over time. Say someone knew they were going to be retiring to Florida in 2 years or so. So we've already been thinking about this. I just wanted you guys to know that as well.
I did some research on other towns' affordable housing programs.
Denise, would you just pull the microphone a little closer?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. And in doing the research, it was interesting because most towns had let's say $10 to $20 million, and they were Cleveland and Denver and Philadelphia. So when we talk about $20 million for Nantucket, it's just it was an interesting disconnect from my perspective. And I would second what Joe said yesterday about if this was starting out at 5 million with a proof of concept idea, by 1 or 2, it works. It's worked out great. Everything's run reasonably smoothly. We've been able to manage it because it's not a huge program. Then I'm more inclined to say that's an interesting idea. But to pretend that we're a Denver or a Philadelphia or a Cleveland with the resources that these communities would have to put behind it, it makes me nervous.
But in many cases, I looked at that as well. In many cases, this was properties that were taken over by the town to begin with.
Mhm.
So they own them for
Mhm.
free,
Mhm.
or they're paying $10,000 for a house, things like
Mhm.
that. So
Yeah.
it's on a number of units, it's significantly higher. I mean, it's
Sure,
yeah.
but they're bigger population places.
Right. But I agree. I mean, we need to have a management control of this whole thing to make it work. Can I ask a question? I was just discussing Housing in Nantucket is a private organization. I mean, I'm not that familiar with it, but this is Ann who spoke to us.
Yes, private 501c3.
Would it be possible to contract that organization to manage this project?
They could.
I think
they
that's
could,
their proposal.
they could respond to an RFP. Yep.
But have we spoken to them about that?
Yes,
Okay.
I have. And Ann stated, at your last meeting, she'd be interested in responding to an RFP for the
Okay,
management of these
okay,
properties.
We need to clarify exactly what they would be eligible to do, which would be to manage the properties once the town acquired them, because we're using our statutory borrowing authority, and bond counsel has said that the only way that we can do that is to lease this or transition this to an entity that's statutorily under Mass General Law authorized to create affordable housing, and that is the CPC has an affordable housing component as defined by law. A housing authority has that same statutory authority, or the Affordable Housing Trust Fund has that authority. So the management of the program would be limited to property maintenance and things of that nature. It would not be able to go out and procure and buy the houses for the town. So I just want to make sure that they're clear on what that piece would look like. Okay.
So just for my edification, the town would, some entity, this program would be put in the hands of an entity. It sounds like it's the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
Correct. We would lease the properties that were acquired
Okay.
to them because they have statutory authority to create
Okay.
affordable housing.
And the Affordable Housing Trust Fund has no staff. Is that correct?
Correct. So they would be able to enter into a management agreement to manage the properties that were procured.
So who acts on behalf of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to issue RFPs?
That would be my staff in my office would do that.
Okay.
We would help them through that process and manage that process with them.
And who then has the oversight responsibility for the condition of the property? And
Well, that
would it be the management company?
Well, it would be the management company and the town, because the Affordable Housing Trust Fund would be leasing the properties from the town. So it would be ultimately, they would have the oversight of the condition of the properties in conjunction with whatever management company we procure to take care of them.
And the management, if it in fact is Housing Nantucket, they're a C3 organization.
Correct.
Do they have a balance sheet?
I have never looked at it, but I do know that they do. I've never seen it, but I know that they have
Mhm.
managed their own properties, so they have rental income and other things on their own that they manage. So
And we would go through an RFP process to procure a management company.
We would go through an RFP process to procure a management company. As well.
So as you're standing here, can you state with some degree of certainty that the town itself will not be in the business of managing these houses?
I would not want to make that assumption or assertion. It's not mine to make, to be honest with you.
I would say that is not.
Could you?
The town manager, however, can make that.
Nicely done,
Very
Brian.
helpful.
I would just say that we're not set up for that at all. So
Yeah.
it's not in town administration's wheelhouse right now. We would contract.
So in order for this, based upon what I'm hearing, in order for this program to actually work as intended, the town would purchase, it would go through the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which has no staff, but would get some help to issue an RFP to hire a management company, which would otherwise not have any relationship to the town to manage the properties. At such time, if the management company were to default or the properties were to fall into a state of disrepair, is it then incumbent upon the town of Nantucket to come in and repair those properties? Or do we not know the answer to that
I don't
question?
know that we totally know the answer to that. I would think that we'd write into any agreement with the management company that they are responsible for that and they need to be held accountable for maintaining them up to.
And then they would go to
standard,
CPC for money to get it done.
but hopefully not.
One big
Which would not be voted on at the town meeting floor.
Sorry, editorial comment. Tucker? Thank you, Libby.
I just feel I should add. So, if we're talking about the 24 units, Housing Nantucket, as an example, could be a respondent to an RFP. I guess I feel like I would be a little remiss with this group if I didn't raise a concern whether they had the bandwidth to take on that number of units. I mean, they have
37 now.
they have 37 now, but they also, for example, had managed the cow pond facility for NET and dropped the management of that, within the last year. So the idea of, and that's a consolidated site. It's sort of about as easy as it might get in terms of a rental management program. We're talking about units spread around, in each one having its own idiosyncrasies and so forth. So I just feel that I need to raise that. The second point is that, so I had been in conversation with Hall Keen Management, who's the developer who proposed the Six Fairgrounds project, to talk to them a little bit conceptually about would a firm like theirs, and they manage 10,000 units off island, so they have some experience in this area, look at actually both the Nantucket Inn and or this type of program. And they had indicated, obviously they would need more details, but in concept, the Nantucket Inn is something they would look at. This type of program, in order for them to respond to an RFP, they'd have to create a new line of business. And their initial concern was it would be quite expensive for them to do this. So it's just a consideration. And in my own opinion, the idea of a pilot is maybe something that makes some headway. But
okay.
And I think, where Tucker left off there, that a pilot is attractive, is, in a nutshell, what's attractive to me about this article. Not all of the 30 million or 20 million, or if it's reduced further, 15 or 10 million dollars would need to be spent at once. I agree. Each property can be vetted on its own. We don't even need to have the same management agreement for each of the properties. We have a private sector that's rife with businesses and sole proprietors whose income is derived from exactly this type of work. And we're talking about, on a per property basis, a pretty small workload, and I think our private sector is well suited to take on those tasks. Maybe not the monitoring piece, but the actual management of the properties.
Libby, go ahead.
When I said before the town wouldn't have anything to do with the managing of it, that is true about the physical managing of the property, but there is a component to managing the management contracts. And if there's a whole bunch of them, then there's just going to be a whole bunch more work for town staff to deal with. So just...
Yeah, I think that's a line item that needs to be considered. There's office work and there's physical work, and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is the vehicle in order to
maybe they
do
need
that.
A full-time staff person. We are asking of some arm of the government to do a lot of work here. And maybe a permanent staff person needs to be created, but I just don't think that it's impossible to find these people.
Yeah, the way I see it looking forward, there's the maintenance of the property, right? Ongoing maintenance. There's also collection of rent. taking applications and leases, qualifying people at different income levels. And so there's a bunch of components beyond making sure the buildings don't fall down around folks. So yes, it's going to require people. There's no doubt about it. And whether all of that can be contracted out or it can be contracted out in two pieces, the building maintenance and sort of the rental management and affordable qualification piece, which Housing Nantucket is doing on the covenants and the rentals they own. So it's not without a lot of details to iron out at all. And I think that from my perspective on the trust, it's not like we think we're going to go out and buy 15 houses in July. It's unlikely we'll have the opportunity to buy at that scale anyway. So I think inherent in the process will be sort of a testing as we go along. So,
yes. Brooke, do you like this program?
So you're asking me personally.
I am asking Brooke,
Okay.
the person.
So Brooke, the person, in my mind, I've been debating in my head the Nantucket, I've had the Nantucket Inn versus this in my head. And people ask me all the time, what direction do you want to go? And I think that this is an opportunity that addresses a significant concern that I hear from our voters and from people in the community about denser housing developments and location of where affordable housing is. And so I think it very effectively gives the voters an option to consider to do this scattered site around Nantucket way of creating affordable housing that is available to year-rounders in perpetuity, which is a goal. Dollar for dollar, it's not the cheapest way to go about it. It's not the simplest management task. But I think if the voters feel strongly that this scattered site idea is the way they want to go, we're prepared to do that. My other concern, and I'm just going to say this frankly, and it has been raised here before, when the town starts competing with people who've just saved enough money to buy $1 million house, this was a comment that came to me on Facebook this week, then you're basically, you're snapping up what is already the low end of the market that some people have barely been able to attain. So that is a negative consequence of this. But on the other hand, it's about taking houses and making sure they're affordable and year-round in perpetuity. So when I discuss with people about housing choices, I say we can wait for the magical, no-cost, easy solution to drop out of the sky. But I've been here 35 years and it hasn't happened yet. So we have to make, with all public policy decisions, weigh the costs and benefits of different routes. And that's sort of my analysis of it. So I hope that helps.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
So Tobias, what does success look like for this program?
Well, I guess maybe just to respond to a couple different things I've heard, and then I'll respond to success. One is I did sit down with Ann Kutzba and kind of talked about how the cow pond units had they ceased to continue that contract, and she informed me that she had a longtime staffer that had been with her 15 years, and he was no longer with her. He moved on took a great job selling ice cream in Provincetown. It was his dream job. And so he bought an ice cream parlor, so God bless him. And so for a time period, she didn't have the staff she really needed to manage the program, and now she feels like she's hired a few more people, and she feels like she does have a little more staff. Secondly, to Brooke's comments about Nantucket or this program, the Neighborhood First program, competing with year-round folks who are looking to purchase homes. I went through as directed by the FinCom and examined which properties through this program actually transitioned from year-round to summer or vice versa. And what I discovered was, of those 11 properties, 3 of the properties were and it lays out in kind of the sheet I laid out for you. 3 of the properties went from year-round to summer or investments, And 4 of the properties were sold from summer residents to investment LLCs. And then one of the property was a locally owned rental and was sold to another locally owned rental. And then 3 of the properties were sold from year-round residents to year-round residents. So, kind of in summary, it's a way of guaranteeing these units. And, ultimately, we're losing every year after year after year, housing stock to the summer community. That we are going in the wrong direction. We need to turn in the right direction. And I'll go back to, I put this housing needs assessment in from RKG, just a line from it, but we could go through it more. And I'll read it here because I think it's important to really know. And I'm quoting here. From 2000 to 2010, Nantucket reportedly gained 530 year-round occupied units and 1,552 seasonal. From 2010 to 2013, Nantucket gained 32 units, lost 160 year-round units, and gained 415 units. Thus, some of the units were previously used as year-round housing have been converted to seasonal homes as shown in the 2015 Housing Needs Assessment. So just to contextualize this, we're going the wrong direction, and how do we steer back onto that direction of getting at least an equal balance between summer homes and year-round homes so we can have a community here?
Toby, I think
next to
just to add, I think we did have this discussion. I mean, I think I brought this up when we first started talking about this, and then I think David's brought it up. We've all talked about this, and I think you made it pretty clear. And I think it's also changed in terms of the amount of homes that we're talking about acquiring in any one period of time, that the actual impact will be insignificant. And I'm certainly a firm believer that we should have available housing stock for first-time buyers. But I do think that this solves both problems, or solves one problem without really affecting the other.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So to David's question, what does success look like in this program? First, I'd like to just kind of walk through the financial spreadsheet because you guys had a couple questions and I wanted to answer them. And I'm sorry, not all these pieces are dialing in is lovely as the way they are on my laptop. But one thing I did was I did lay out the kind of cost per bedroom because I thought it was important with the conversation about the Nantucket Inn to kind of see what it costs per bedroom. So that costs about $288,000. So you're getting 53 bedrooms, just showing that, when you're getting housing stock that's 1 or that's 2 or 3 bedrooms, you're getting a lot more beds per square foot of area. And I think that's an important thing to note because not all programs target kind of larger units. Under the operating expenses, David, you mentioned we should have a light item in there for management, and I totally agree. So I did a light item for 10% of the income, which worked out to about $65,000 per year. I also, in talking to a couple landscapers, doubled the line item for landscaping, and I also doubled the line item for repairs and maintenance, just so you're aware. So those are some of those things. And so to get to that summary, because it's not showing up on the one you have, so that works about...
Just make the column wider.
Is that what it is, Stephen? Yeah. You guys are so smart. Oops.
Up top.
Go up to O, up to where you see the O on the top, and then just drag it wider, like that.
Yay, thank you.
Excel training for free.
I'll just hold this.
I'm going to go back over there next week.
I think
so to kind of contextualize what those 5 and 10 years were, or to what we had for operating expenses in the last one, we had about $160,000 per year in what I showed you last week. So I increased it significantly. And then you can kind of see the operating income. Last time we talked, that deficit was at, 1 second. was about $400,000, and it's now about $520. So I just wanted to try to get as close to possible as what the real number should look like. So I hope you find that helpful. To answer the question of what success is what we put into our community. Success is, do we believe that we can continue in an age with a high level of inequality in our society? If we as a society can get together and make a choice to have a dramatic impact and step forward and move forward on policies and show leadership as a community to execute a complex program based on state, federal, local financing, and a plethora of complexities. I think we have the expertise at this table. I think we have a great town management team, financial team. We have some great leadership on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I've put a lot of work into this with Rick Atherton, and I think we can move forward on this. And I think the voters have consistently asked for some action. I think furthermore, it goes in line with the Board of Selectmen's strategic plan of maintaining the SHI list units over 2021. I think it maintains the Board of Selectmen's kind of strategic plan on making sure we have a range of units between 30 and 200% AMI. And lastly, one of the board's pieces for their strategic plan is making sure, and I'll quote here, finalize a plan to address housing needs specifically for town employees. And through this program, we'd have a significant amount of housing for town employees that I think is very valuable for retaining qualified staff for our community. So I think that's, to me, what success looks like. Success is rising to a challenge that from 2008 onward, we've been consistently facing, and we keep coming up with pieces to try to solve it. And I like that. And let's keep moving forward.
So, thank you. We're talking, at least starting out, asking the voters to invest $30 million in your definition of success. What I don't see here is South Shore Road and that proposal. Why not, as a community, rally around the fact that that's a proposal that's on the table, that we allow it to go forward, and that, which I think if we did, would we get to our 10%? And if we're looking at only needing additional 40 units and we haven't included any of them in here.
I'm sorry, David.
The South Shore Road proposal.
The current iteration of South Shore Road, I understand, would add 25 units to our list.
Okay.
So, Tucker, with that in mind, would this program help us to get the additional 40 units we need to maintain the 10%?
This program certainly could help, absolutely. And I just want us all to be like eyes wide open about any program, program.
Of course.
Yeah.
So we're a wealthy community, so I don't think the risk in this program is probably not on the money side. The risk in this program is how it's executed and whether there's organizational capacity to fulfill the various elements of the program. And speaking personally, I'd like the idea of a smaller program. In point of fact, I think a few years ago, this is where the Affordable Housing Trust Fund was at, which was, let's have some money so that we can go out and do this. And I think that we've matured in our thinking and put a little bit more brain power to this, that coming at this program incrementally to see if it works, see if we can build the institutional capacity to manage this kind of program without committing the town down a road that we're perhaps not fully prepared to go. And I think I firmly believe that there's nothing that you will gain a lot of support with success. Without success, this and perhaps other types of programs will have a real problem with the voters. And so I personally like the idea of a smaller program, try it out, see how it works. If it's working, come back. And if it's been successful, I don't see how, you have as big a hill to climb. But that's a personal opinion on how I would actually attack it. Yes.
Mary Longacre. Am I correct that the article includes only money to purchase property? Because it looks like we're losing $500,000 for wherever time period that is, and I don't see where that money comes from.
Comes from the taxpayer.
So we're voting to approve not only the however many millions to purchase property, but also the ongoing forever commitment to fund the deficit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is correct.
So, Mary, how I like to explain that is about $44 a year ongoing, and so I scaled the article back to $20 million to try to assume. Just imagining like the activity of putting together these numbers was looking at 2018 and saying what properties could we have purchased in 2018 that were sold. Which ones kind of make sense as far as having, do they have multiple units? Are they in good condition? Would you purchase them, as a private citizen? Would you want to buy that house as a good house? And then so from there, I kind of came to that, that number of 20 million, kind of walking back. What's your 10-year cost of the overall program? So not just purchasing the homes up front and doing the capital expenses, which would be about $15 million. It's kind of looking at that whole cost of program over 10 years. And then to get into that a little further, you'll notice in the operating income, kind of that cost goes down over time of the program as you're paying down your debt and, based on various escalations that we plugged in as well.
I understand. I just wanted to make sure, as Tucker's saying, eyes wide open. We're not just voting money to purchase houses. We're voting a permanent commitment to subsidizing the occupation of those houses from taxpayer money.
Yeah, of course. And to get at that a little further, I think, when we move forward with the Sachem's Path project, that I think was, in the eyes of many in the community, a success. The numbers kind of disputed, whether or not you include land or whatnot, but that was about, $5 to $6 million. And, we don't have a lot of shy units to account for that. And also they're not on the town's balance sheet. Those are private citizens that own the homes. Why don't we as a community own our land? If you don't own it, you can't control it.
Well, I just want to interject here because Mary asked the question, this article includes only, or does this article include only money for purchasing? And I think that it doesn't. I think that contemplated in this article now is that the town could purchase deed restrictions on properties so that privately owned homes or properties, probably a better way to put it, could also be eligible for this money, right? So you could, I think at a much, much lower cost than $288,000 per bedroom, which itself is, I think, 2/3 of what we saw the cost might be at Nantucket Inn. But even the $288,000, I think, is very high. And I think if you mix in hopefully a large number of deed restriction purchases or grants or however that needs to be structured, that cost per shy eligible unit comes way down. And then you don't have to worry about management. You don't have to worry about a lot of other intangible things.
Tobias, going back to what David suggested, would you entertain amending your article to, I don't know what the number should be, whether it's 3 million or 4 million or 5 million on a 18-month period as a test to see how it works, and then coming back to the next town meeting for a subsequent follow-up?
I think I've heard often through my experience on the Board of Selectmen, people want to, I believe for a program to be successful, there needs to be a lot of kind of checks and balances. And so in my mind, I want to see a commitment. I don't want to ask the voter for $3 million. Just, it's $3 million. We'll see if it works. I want to say, if you're committed to this idea of mixed site, $20 million, this is what it may cost. Furthermore, it holds the Board of Selectmen and the Affordable Housing Trust Fund accountable, saying, hey, you guys want to move forward with this. There's money on the table. You got to make sure your I's and T's are crossed. The Board of Selectmen will ultimately have the authority to oversee whether or not these funds are dispersed. And I think it puts a big onerous on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to make sure we get this done right.
But we're being policed by the state to get this done. I mean, or maybe federal, I guess. Something has to happen. We need to come up with moderate income, lower income housing.
Mm-hmm.
That's not enough of a policing as far as you're concerned. I mean, saying $20 million saying $5 million is a big difference.
Yeah,
psychologically.
It's I don't know, the differences between, per year, there's 1,100, 700.
Yeah, don't go there.
I just disagree with that argument. Like, financially as a community, the difference between 5 and 20 million is the difference between like 7 lattes a year and like 3 lattes.
But if it doesn't work to buy,
I would just caution you against the latte thing.
Okay.
It doesn't work on like a per person basis like that. You need to look at the valuation of properties, and it's a little bit more complex than that.
I understand. I'm trying to simplify it, Stephen.
I
hope
get
you.
it, but this is probably the wrong venue to try to simplify it in those terms.
I appreciate that.
But my thought process is, if it works, the 20 million is not going to be a problem. If it doesn't work, you're not going to get more than the first allocation anyway. So,
but
it's neither here nor there. I think, let's, that might be a place to have this is a citizens warrant article. It'll show up at town meeting floor. If someone is interested in amending the article and trying to make it make sense that way, let the voters decide.
I mean, I think we could reduce the number from $20 million, but I also think that the proof of concept lies in the execution, right? I don't think we're going to be buying more than 1 to 3 houses a year. So the first 2 or 3 are successful, the money's already there to buy the rest of them. And if they're not, the Board of Selectmen says no.
I think in terms of a cap, I'd like to see, a limit on the number of, on the amount of money that can be spent per shy unit that's added, and that's where I'd like to see. I mean, if we're going to spend $20 million, I don't think you can find $20 million worth of projects in the short term.
I don't either.
But maybe you could if you spent $5 million per unit. That's where I think, David, you said maybe this isn't maybe the risk isn't on the money side, but could be on the money side. But if you stick to some guideline where it's going to be some percentage of the average house sale in a year, or just a strict number that needs to be raised from time to time, that might give some people some comfort.
Yeah.
There are so many open details about how this will work. I'm not more comforted after the 20 minutes we've just spent than I was when I first said that 25 minutes ago.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to speak for Denise, but we were both raised in sort of the same kinds of environments doing business. And this is the fact that we're sitting here having these kinds of discussions about spending this kind of money with this little detail.
But we're not asking, this article doesn't ask us to spend money. This article says, can the Board of Selectmen have a discussion about spending money? And then each proposal is discussed and vetted on its own.
Correct.
And there's an RFP for somebody to execute. And there's, details known before every contract's executed, whether it's the purchase contract or the management contract, and on and on.
I agree
at all as the Nantucket Inn project, which was $30 million. Then we'll see what comes next. This is $30 million.
That way, and progressive, not just say it's $5 million.
Well, it is. It is written as a permissive article.
It's only 5 lattes. If I get to a bank, then throw me out in the street and say, get that guy out.
And I would respectfully say there's probably very little transaction risk associated, which is what you just described. This is much more than just transaction, and that's where I think many of us get a very nervous feeling about, notwithstanding, I mean, if this article were to go through town meeting, the Board of Selectmen will, there will be a number of proposals that will be put forth, and we'll be in the business. I mean, I think it's a snare and a delusion to think that there's a throttling mechanism that's going to occur at the Board of Selectmen. We don't even have criteria in which to make decisions about what to acquire. You've just put, potentially a very good one out there, which is limit how much money we're willing to subsidize on a unit, and perhaps do some forcing in that direction. But that's where I think, Denise is at, which is how do we...
But a counterpoint to that would be prior year allocations to the Affordable Housing Trust, which, separate from the select board, is charged with creating housing. They've been given amounts of money and haven't created housing. So why would it be any different to give the select board, with all of its priorities and all the things on its docket, say, now you have this resource? Why do you think they're going to run out and spend money just because they have the authorization to do so? I mean, history just doesn't tell us that that's what happens.
Mm-hmm. I'm still at the, how are you going to get this done? And there aren't the people, and there aren't the programs, and there aren't the policies, and there aren't the criteria. It's just too waffly for me to get behind any amount of money right now.
But they don't have to spend the money until all that's decided.
None of that. Yeah, but who's going to actually
But the Affordable Housing Trust, Brooke already got up and said they're going to create a position. Somebody's going to go to work on this. They're going to fund it.
She said potentially.
Brooke, would you like to clarify that? I heard you say you guys were going to take this on.
I think we are prepared to take it on if the voters hand it our way. Do we have can we hire a staff person? No, that's a process that goes on around town administration. Can we hire consultants? Absolutely. Can we get the expertise that we need to help us in this process? Absolutely. We're doing it already. We're doing it on various things that are going on. I'm not saying this is a layup. Don't get me wrong. We know it's a lot of work. We know. And I said clearly when you asked me what my opinion is, it's a much more complicated management piece than a Nantucket Inn or a redevelopment at the fire station would be, et cetera, et cetera. I get that. But you can't avoid that management complication and get scattered site housing. You can't avoid that complication and meet the demand that we're hearing in the community for scattered site affordable housing. Mm-hmm. So again, it's a scale of there's a segment of the community that's saying very loudly, we don't want dense affordable housing developments. We want to try this. Tobias put it on the table, give us an opportunity to try it. I'm not going to tell you whether we should do it or not, but we would be prepared to expend dollars out of our operating budget to make it work if the voters send it our way. I can't speak for all the other members, but
thank you.
I also think that we have two other articles in this citizens warrant, one for $750,000 from the CPC funding the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and another $3 million from the Board of Selectmen to 5. So in a sense, we're already giving them money to do the same thing that Tobias is asking us to vote on.
Then let's see how that works first.
We can't continue to wait and do nothing, or we have no control over our destiny. I mean, I think this is a leadership issue. And I think that we are in a position to try something that, you're right, may or may not work, but we're not running out and spending $20 million immediately.
So if it's a leadership issue, where's the leadership going to come from for either of the programs? I mean, we just said we want the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to manage it, and now we're saying that they don't have the leadership capability. I mean, I think we're caught in a do loop on this.
But I think that they're funded enough to hire consultants to do this work.
It's not sustainable.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
I just want to clarify a few things. One, the $5 million voted by the CPC isn't coming to the trust fund saying use it in this way. I just want to be very clear that if we're saying use this money in this way, we're going to the trust fund and saying do this program, which is probably the most expensive way that you can create housing. And we recognize that. We know we are asking you to spend to do it the most expensive way. And that's just what I want to be eyes wide open about. And there may be good value to doing that. The question I had for Tobias was, you brought up Tobias Sachem's Path as like an example of a good program. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So if a larger sum were ultimately authorized by a town meeting, that, you know, $20 or $30 million type of figure, and something came along that didn't fit your exact mold as this article was originally conceived, where we're going to buy these individual houses all around the island, but make up an example. Josh and Jamie get tired of being vilified, and some portion or all of Surfside Crossing property is available. I'm making this up. But could you use these funds, you know, to maybe do something there that was like a Sachem's Path? Would you envision that being a suitable use of these funds?
So I'll try to, I appreciate the question, so I'll try to answer it as straightforward and as complexly as possible. I'm going to read the article. It says here, to see if the town will vote to appropriate and also raise, borrow pursuant to any applicable statute, or transfer of available funds up to $20 million for the purpose of acquiring existing properties or interest in and or restrictions on existing properties for affordable housing purposes, which may include an affordable rental program and which all would qualify on the SHI list. In my mind, and I'd have to speak again with town council, that is some pretty flexible language to potentially imagine a scenario, Tucker, of doing something like you suggest. Existing properties. Like,
I'm just trying to bring up that, again, a pilot in a certain way makes sense to me, but if the idea is, well, we want to have a larger sum available for optionality, and the options are broader than it's got to be single family homes all over the place, and it could be used for that unusual type of opportunity like I described, that maybe casts a little different light on the topic.
Yeah, so I look at that in kind of two ways. One, I think the community is interested in a mixed site, and I think there's some value in that, in saying that, 40B doesn't follow zoning. I think we need to respect our zoning. So I'd like to see any process that moves forward kind of respect that. I think there is some flexibility in regards to what you're saying and how, in what the definition of an existing property is. Like, that to me is very vague. And I walked through this with town council. I was like, I want to be directed about making sure it's mixed site, but I'm also acknowledging that let's try to deal with the problem and being pragmatic. I'm trying to answer both. I'm trying to answer everything you guys want. So like, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. So define existing property to me. It's flexible.
I think I just want to clarify again for people watching at home or in the room who are, keep talking about this like it's the most expensive way to create SHI housing, and it's not. Maybe what's proposed up here, which is all purchase and construction, is more expensive than some other projects, but that's not the only way these funds can be expended. I would prefer that a small percentage of the whatever sum is allocated would be used to purchase and build homes. I would prefer that more deed restrictions were purchased, and the onus of management and doing all the things that are required to create SHI eligible housing were put on to private property owners, and that the property stay on the tax rolls. But this allows for that. It allows for a whole range of things to be done to create SHI eligible housing. I agree with Tobias that spreading out housing initiatives around the island is appropriate. I think that zoning has value. It's decided on once or recently twice every year, we decide on what things should go where and how dense they should be. I would prefer that that's how the funds are used. But Tucker's probably right. The language is broad enough that this money probably would be legally available to do something like a Sachem's Path or a more centralized housing project, if you will. But this is not the most expensive way. This is not jumping in before we know how things go. This is a permissive article that puts the power with the Affordable Housing Trust, the housing specialist, and the select board. Those are several levels of review for public discussion to have this debate. What we're talking about today is not spending a bunch of money. It's, do we, as town meeting voters and taxpayers, do we want to spend money to help create affordable housing? That's what this is. It's as broad as that. I think, we can get bogged down in the numbers here, but it's not really these numbers. It's not these houses, and it's not only purchasing the houses. And I think that needs to be remembered.
So are we at a point where perhaps some sort of a little bit more specificity and compromise, or whatever the appropriate word is warranted, along the lines of our recommendation being to spend up to X amount of dollars, some percentage going to subsidies to see if, on a proof of concept, if that's a viable pathway, that some of the money be spent there, and that a certain amount of money and no more be used to outright purchase and then reevaluate whether the program's working. So, we're taking some baby steps here. We're doing some proof of concept. We're trying some things out to see if it works. And you get an opportunity to have an evaluation as to whether this is an appropriate way to go. And it doesn't sound like it necessarily is going to hold things up just because this program is going to take a while to roll out.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I don't know what those numbers should be, or what everybody can agree on. I would throw out for discussion that maybe there be a cap of $5 million. Not touch the $20 million total number, but $5 million can be expended from the fund in any one year. And I don't even know that there's a fund. I think we're borrowing it every year, so I don't know what the language needs to be. But to make people comfortable that we're not spending too much all at once, I'll throw out for discussion $5 million is the limit for spending in 1 year.
And I would counter and just say, I think that without doing an evaluation, I would have a hard time getting behind that kind of number a year. I think it's an appropriate to go up to do an evaluation, right, and then look at it, and then and come back, and not so that we get on a treadmill. I mean, a year's going to go by pretty quickly. So,
and I don't think that we have the wherewithal to spend $5 million in a year, to be frank. But if it makes everybody more comfortable, I'd be happy to support, a lower limit than $20 million. I think $5 million is probably too low for the life of the project. If it was, $15 million and we spend, $3 million in a year, maybe that's better. I don't think that this needs to come back every year for reauthorization. I don't think that you can judge a program like this within 1 year and then come back and say, we need another $5 million. I don't think that's appropriate either.
I agree.
I think we have enough town meetings so that we could just like this lease for the
Wisconsin Bluff.
Wisconsin Bluff. It seems to be negotiated every 5 minutes. We can easily make adjustments to this. I just think if you should look at this like a bank would look at you. If you haven't done something before, the bank's going to loan you some money. They're going to see how you do, and the next time you come to them, they're going to treat you differently if you have success. So it's kind of the way I look at it.
How do people feel about the suggestion that we tie the expenditures to the number of SHI units that are created? I know Tobias, you're talking about 30% AMI to 200% AMI. Not all of those might be shy eligible, but I'd like to see these programs or these monies be used to create units that are shy eligible. So, I'd like, for every $500,000 that's spent, I'd like to see a unit go on the shy list.
I'm with you on that. I'm not particularly interested in creating having the taxpayers create affordable housing that's not otherwise eligible for the shy list.
Okay.
I think the market should be doing
putting
that.
a number on it so that, if you wanted to spend up to the limit in a year, we know how many shy units we're going to get.
If I could just comment on that, it's my understanding that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that all rental units count towards the shy list. And so if at least 25% or less of them, and I laid it out in this sheet that I passed around, if at least 25% of them are rented for under 80% AMI, and they also participate in the lottery. And so thus the purpose of all of the units being restricted between 30% and 200% gives the town flexibility to have other rents that are outside of that perspective, that range, where all those units also count. But the reason for that 30 to 200%, which I reference, that I would like to include in the article, is so that the bonds would be tax exempt.
But would they be tax exempt if they were capped at 100% of AMI?
Yeah, but then I just don't think it gives you the flexibility to do some other things you might want with the program.
It doesn't necessarily give you more shy units.
It doesn't give you any more shy units.
No, I understand it doesn't give you more shy units, but are we in the business of creating subsidized housing for people with 200% of AMI, or are we in the business of creating affordable housing for people that truly need the housing?
Yeah, I would definitely support as low as possible, or
well, I think low as possible is down at 100% or 120%.
But at 200%, can we put town employees there that we might not be able to put in if we limit it to 100%?
Tell me what AMI is, and I'll do the math.
It's about 100. Thanks.
At 100%?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you go to 120%, I think you can probably put town employees in there.
One thing, the 30 to 200 was born out of the recommendation from bond counsel that it be included in the motion to properly identify what we were considering affordable, so that it wasn't something that became difficult to go and borrow later when we were including ranges. So the range was put in there at the recommendation of bond counsel. It has nothing to do about whether they're tax exempt or not. We will have to make that determination once the program is up and running and we're buying houses and see how it works. In all likelihood, it will be tax exempt, but bond counsel needs to see what that looks like as we go through this program. The 30 to 200% was done so that when town meeting was voting, they would have an identifiable number of what the article was considering for affordability purposes. We could make that whatever numbers we want. Bond counsel doesn't have any concern about what the numbers are. I took 30 to 200 based on Tobias's recommendation and asked bond counsel. They said, fine. If we wanted to modify it to 30 to 100%, bond counsel is not going to say yes or no to that. It was to clearly identify what the town was considering affordable for this implementation and borrowing under this program. So that, just to make that clear, that what that was really for.
And just to add, I mean, I know that Tobias's intention is that all the units count. And I think that the trust fund has been viewing the work that they're doing with the data platform that is going to provide greater detail into demand at the different levels, and maybe informing how the units got filled on an AMI range, but always ensuring that any given particular property met the requirements of going on the shy list. So where you had 2 or 3 units on a particular property, you could have one at 80 or less, and the other 1 or 2 could be at basically any other level, and it's still, all 3 would still count on the SHI list, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
So as far as we know, we cannot combine 12 properties scattered around Nantucket into one rental development and aggregate them and say if 25% of them are rented at 80% AMI or below, they would all count to the shy list. So if we bought a single home in Pulpus, it would have to be rented at 80% AMI. If we bought a property that could have multiple units, as long as a minimum of 25% of those units, so it's a primary, secondary, tertiary, if one of them is rented at 80% or below, the other two can be priced at different levels depending on what the data platform tells us the needs are. The other reason to keep it flexible in terms of AMI levels, to my mind, is about the fiscal viability, financial viability of this program, that if you have to rent everything at 100% AMI or below, you're restricting how much you can bring in income. Not only are you not meeting a huge demand for affordable housing in the community, you're also restricting your flexibility on pricing things in a way that makes this financially viable. So I would prefer to have that more flexibility and that have it be a policy decision for the Affordable Housing Trust where they get priced on the AMI levels, because we know there's need all the way from the bottom, well over 100%, 120, 150% AMI. The need is deep. We'll know more about it when we get our data platform results, but I would encourage a little more flexibility than for all these stated reasons. So I hope that makes sense.
All right, committee. Unless we want to stay here forever. You got a
Me too,
spaghetti
Cliff.
dinner. I've got book club at the Anglers Club tonight.
Cooking spaghetti dinner.
So how are we going to move beyond here? I don't sense that there's a lot of appetite and potentially not enough votes to get to a big number on this program unless there's some sort of way station or intermediate stops along the way. But I could be wrong on that.
I like Stephen's suggestion.
Which one?
The 15 million and the 3. I think that's reasonable.
Okay, Peter, do you want to weigh in on this?
So you're talking 15 million. Maybe you're not talking anything. You want to tell us what you're thinking?
I think I've said a lot of words today.
Yeah.
I at one point I said $15 million, not more than $3 million spent in any year, and I'd like to see one shy unit for every 500,000. I'd like to change that. I think we can do it for less. So I'd like to see a shy unit for every $400,000 spent.
I think that's reasonable.
And is there checks and balances? Is there a period? Do we do the first year and then decide whether it's going to go forward, or is the 15,000 allocated? Perfect. 15 million. I'm sorry.
I just don't think you can judge a program like this in 1 year.
I agree.
I just don't think it's reasonable to say you spend $3 million or $5 million and then come back to us next year and tell us how you did.
Okay, so what we're saying is $15 million, no more than whatever the criteria is going to be on an annual basis, for argument's sake, $3 million. But it goes on until the 15 million is used.
You got to produce a shy eligible unit.
No, I don't think that
for
part's
every
true.
$400,000.
Right.
So if you're going to spend $3 million in the first year, show us the 7 shy units that you produced. I don't know how you police that. That's just
Rick. We're going to get wisdom here.
You're not going to get wisdom, but you're going to get, at least from my perspective, one of the original purposes of bringing this article forward was because we had meetings last summer with over 800 people filling the high school auditorium.
For a ZBA meeting.
Now, when you get 800 people and they're coming next to see you, and they're going to come see the selectman, the next 40B that shows up. So I want to take this back a little bit to the reason to do this isn't to set all these little markers. The reason is to provide a safety net, in my mind, for 40B developers like Posner and Feely. They can show up in somebody else's neighborhood, and we're going to be right back in square one. And you can scale this back and back and back. Right now, as I follow the program, we should be very close to 10%. But, you know, we've got a lawsuit next door. Maybe that'll never get settled. Maybe Richmond will never file for the building permits. I'm not even sure what I'm talking about. Things happen. And if those things happen and you don't provide the ability or recommend to the town meeting they have the ability to step in and get us to safe harbor for another 12-month period, you know, town may not be prepared to do this. But to me, that was the real purpose for this in the first place. So just think that through with all the restrictions, which I think are going to happen, as Steve said, anyway. You don't need to restrict them at this level in a warrant recommendation. So,
Stephen, I want to just question this $400,000 limit per unit and a $3 million spend per year. I don't know how you buy houses on the open market in Nantucket and get a shy listed unit for $400,000 when you
don't
can only
buy all
spend
the houses, and you blend. It's a blended average. So
Okay.
you're going to be buying deed restrictions, which I know is one of your proposals.
Absolutely.
And I know that Tobias has added it to his. So that's how you do it.
Yep.
Because I think that any of the proposals that we've seen, Nantucket Inn and Tobias's, are far too expensive.
but it
And there
basically
is appetite in the
precludes
private
buying
sector.
houses.
No, it doesn't, because you're talking about an average within a year. That's what I meant to propose. So if that wasn't clear to anybody, I'm correcting the
Okay.
record. It's the average within a year. You got to produce a shy eligible unit for every $400,000 within a year.
So go ahead.
I'm not entirely sure, based on the way that the article was drafted and submitted, that
we
we
can
could
do that.
actually write a motion that would allow us to buy deed restrictions on properties. It's not written that way.
Can I?
And I don't know that it could be amended, and I don't know that bond counsel, who is the ultimate arbiter on a borrowing motion, whether it would be able to be done. Truthfully.
Yeah. So Brian, just to address that, I don't know bond counsel, never met him before, so I defer to you. I did sit down with Sarah Alger and go over that bit of language that I did share with the FinCom about, you know, deed restriction and or other purposes or whatnot. So
We'd have to, I mean, we'd have to confirm with bond counsel that it fit within the scope and was able to be done. So if it's something that is going to be passed, then I'd have to go back and ask bond counsel to review it and draft it if it was intended to be included in any motion that you are going to do.
I thought we discussed that at several meetings. I'm
so too.
disappointed that we don't have that answer, because it's critical for me. I don't want to see $15 million go towards buying houses.
So I'm going to come back to the concept of an appropriation spending up to X amount of dollars, and a certain percentage of that has to go to the program you're talking about of that money, and that notwithstanding the wise counsel from Mr. Atherton, I have a problem with programs that don't get evaluated on a periodic basis.
Can I say something? Sorry. I like Mr. Morey's buy down concept, but I just want to be clear that the program, as it's shown up on the screen, has a $625,000 kind of average shy unit price. So if we're saying, well, we want you to do something, trust fund, that's going to blend, we want some of those, and we want to blend it down to 400. That means we're getting some things done at 200. I'm not sure how we're doing that yet. I just want to be clear.
I think it's the buy down. If you buy a unit that you subsidize at 600 and you buy a buy down for 100, you got a $350,000 average cost.
Yeah, I just don't know how many opportunities there are out there to buy down for 200,000. I mean, there may be some.
I mean, I would defer to Stephen, but the numbers that I've heard him say are under $100,000. But I don't know the market, so.
That was on a per bedroom basis, not a per unit basis, but still there is appetite from the private sector. I don't know if 400,000. There's no magic to that number.
Okay.
There ought to be some number. You know, if the issue standing between us and getting some authorization for the Affordable Housing Trust and the Select Board to have resources available to create housing, you know, that's a reasonable compromise. And maybe $400,000 isn't a number that the housing, you know, advocates are comfortable with. So maybe it ought to be 500. I don't know, but there ought to be something. You know, somebody's got to be responsible for producing a certain number of things for a certain number of dollars.
Denise, would you like to make a motion?
I make a motion, we take no action.
Second.
Any discussion?
This is an emotional issue, and I'm just wondering how it's going to play at town meeting. I mean, we can take no action, but then we really just give up our chance to advocate or not advocate for something. Yeah, because something's going to happen. It's going to be a major issue at town meeting, one way or the other. And I don't know which direction it's going to go, but it just almost seems like we're putting our head in the sand.
What would you propose as a counter motion?
I don't have an answer at this point, but I guess the question becomes, you know, it seems to me that the people presenting the article don't seem to be coming back to us with something that's as flexible as what we're looking for. So do we? I don't know what the answer is, but I think maybe we put the onus back onto Toby and Rick and ask them to come back to us with a more acceptable proposal based on the things they've heard us say today. I mean, we can sit here and rewrite their article, but I don't think that's what they want us to do.
No, I think the only way our input would have to come in the form of a comment of what it was that we would support. I'm a little uncomfortable doing a take no action on this one, only because I think we need to have a position. I think
there's an opportunity cost to doing nothing.
Correct.
There's an opportunity cost to each neighborhood that will be subject to future 40Bs and to the island as a whole, which is damaged irreparably when you have the developments that we've seen proposed and built.
But I don't think that this article solves that problem. I think that's an emotional argument to be made, but you can't do 40 units on a program that's buying onesies and twosies.
And it's been explained to us in several meetings that this article is not meant to address that. It's not meant to get us to safe harbor. It's meant to get us to 10%. This allows us to add incrementally units to the shy list so that we get to that 10%. We're not relying on this to get us safe harbor for a year or 2 years. We're relying on the private sector, and Tucker's represented to us that the applications are moving through, and in a short number of weeks at this point, we will get safe harbor protection from the Richmond development. And whether that comes to pass or not, he's not responsible for it. I see you jumping up.
I've never said will, but
may, right? So no, this isn't going to address that problem, but this will give us some resources to help us get towards that ultimate 10%.
I agree. Okay. I think this gives us some agency over the future, because otherwise we are very vulnerable to the 40B. We don't control our destiny. And while I agree we should not go out and willy-nilly buy houses for all of this money, we have to at least have some financing mechanism in place to make a decision at the right time.
So we just need more answers for clarity for what Steve wants to do with the covenants, with deed restrictions, and hold off on how much time we have left.
If we want our motion and comment to be printed in the warrant, we have no more time.
Yeah.
We have today.
Right.
Great.
I didn't like take no action either. I'm just trying to get it to closure, because we're going around and around and around. And we're not any clearer on how it's all going to work. And to Mary's excellent point that she made, we are saying to taxpayers, in perpetuity, you're writing a check to subsidize housing for people on Nantucket, in perpetuity. And is that fiscally responsible? And that's where I know I sound like I'm digging my heels in. I'm just, danger, Mr. Smith, right? So Will Smith or whoever that was. Thank you. Will Smith. Lost in space.
I think
old.
there's got to be a
so-
balance between fiscally responsible and morally responsible. And I think that I 100% agree with you in terms of your day job against this situation. I think this situation's gone on a long time, and it doesn't seem to me that we're getting any closer. And I wish there was an alternative, but right now I don't see an alternative.
For the last 3 years, the Affordable Housing Trust has come and asked for $500,000, $750,000, $1 million. And we say, you don't have a plan. You have a little bit of money and you haven't done anything with it, and you don't have a plan. And now the Affordable Housing Trust came with a plan, and the Citizens Group came with another plan. And we're saying, well, now we don't know all the details. I mean, at what point are we going to say that, put it to the voters and say, do you want to support something? Do you want to allocate some
Stephen,
resources?
not for one moment is this a plan, this article. Not for one moment is there a plan behind this article. Please don't say there's a plan.
There is a plan. There's several plans. There are different ways that the money can be used to create child-eligible housing.
Plan is name, date, by who, when, how much, what's the
Right,
criteria for success. That's a plan.
And I think what's happening is people don't like the answers as to who it might be, but it has been discussed that Housing Nantucket, Ann Kutzba stood here and said, this is something we'd like to respond to. If you put out an RFP, we'd like to do it.
Yeah, well, that's
So, you can say you don't like who's going to do it.
No, I'm not saying that.
no, we're not. Yeah,
No one said that.
Actually, it has been said. Maybe not in this meeting and maybe not on the record, but it has been said.
so we have a take no action motion. We have a second. Do we want to vote on that?
Sure.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Aye.
Okay, so we're not going to do it as take no action. So we need a motion either to not to adopt or to adopt.
I'll make a motion to adopt.
I will second.
And adopt the article as proposed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is there a discussion on that?
No.
I just think we need it's some kind of oversight after a certain period of time to make sure it's working.
I think could we put that in the comment? Because I would be comfortable with that. I mean, I also agree with Peter and Stephen. This is going to be a big deal on the town meeting floor. And if we're naive, if we don't think that all those tipping point people are going to show up at this meeting and talk about this, and they have some valid points. And I think that there are other ways that we can build in accountability. And I think Stephen's right. We've heard that Housing Nantucket is going to be involved. We've heard that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is going to be involved. And I think that we as a group can look at some of the other money that we're giving Brooks Group and talk about how we can help them build a program that will support this program. I think we have other options. And I do like the deed restrictions. I think these are reasonable solutions. And I don't want to do nothing, right? I think doing nothing is abdicating our agency and power to solve this. We can't do nothing. There is an opportunity cost. We saw it happen when we voted down our island home, right? We lost $6 million that night, gone, because we will never be able to get back what we didn't vote through. And it's the same situation here. 10 units a year. We can try to make that difference. But if we don't vote to appropriate the money, can't do anything.
Chairman, Mr. Chairman, can I just say one quick thing? Really quick. The real estate market in Nantucket is so dynamic. It is virtually impossible to put together a plan with all the T's crossed, all the I's dotted, because it's moving day in and day out. And and the argument that we have been making from the Affordable Housing Trust for the last 3 years is if we don't have the financial bandwidth, we cannot make inroads to this problem. And all I can say to you is we have done our homework and we are ready to hit the ground running. It's really about funding. It's about giving us money to do the work that we're prepared to do. And I just hope the community will get behind this article and in its most flexible form and we have tools in our toolbox. We are doing the work. We're going to have the data. All of it's there. At some point, the community has to trust its leaders to do the right thing and to give us the money to do it. And that's what I'm asking for.
Any other comments?
Nope.
Cliff? Yeah, it sounds.
We're going to put in our motion that we're going to, we're going to do this, and then we're going to assess after $5 million or $3 million spent, and then determine whether or not.
Well, no, now we're actually voting on a motion that was seconded to go forward with the warrant as written.
Right, in our motion changes the whole article period.
Or comment.
No, it's just a comment.
We have to put in a comment.
Comment in the motion of whether bears weight on it.
Correct.
Personally, I can't support the full value of this, and I'm definitely in the camp of a lower appropriation with an evaluation. I think if we were at $5 million, coupled with the $3 million that we're probably going to end up certainly talking about for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, that's $8 million. And so that's where I'm at.
So by putting that in our motion, that would direct.
Well, I'd have to ask Stephen if he wanted to.
I'd like to take a vote, and then I'd like to reassess if it doesn't pass.
Okay. So Stephen has a motion on the floor. It's been seconded to appropriate whatever the article's number is. It's 30 in the article.
20 million is
20.
The current proposal, and that's my motion.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Nay. Okay, so now we're back to having a discussion about
The amount.
either take no action, not to adopt, or to adopt with some limit. Somebody want to make a motion?
To adopt the article amending the amount from 20 million to 15 million.
Second.
Discussion?
I think it needs to be lower than that.
Well, we ought to have a discussion about where we're going to get to, because we're going to end up probably 4-3 again. So is there a number that we all can get to?
It's not just the number, it's the number that needs to be reached and determine whether we move forward. I mean, if we spent $5 million and it didn't work, then we don't spend any more money. That's what I'm trying to say.
But every project, this isn't like an omnibus bill where everything gets spent at once. Every project goes back to the Board of Selectmen. So there is opportunity to stop it at any time.
I agree.
It's the highest elected body that we have that's going to vet it every time. So if that's not enough comfort, then I would ask that one of you four suggest a number that you might be agreeable to, and maybe we can move on.
What is the criteria for success at the same time? What are we judging it on?
Well, I think
Could we get to a...
You made a great point that we need so many shyless things, and if we
can do that.
Can we get to a point where we agree to an up to number with some criteria that are, before we even enter into this, that the selectmen, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund people have, that we do that administratively and not try to define it here? So what we're saying is we'll authorization up to whatever the number is that we can agree on, and that before the first dollar is spent, a group of people work to put a set of criteria together, and it's approved. And that's basically what we use to go forward with to make these decisions. And maybe it's a blended cost per shy unit or some other?
Sure, I brought those things up because I think those are reasonable safeguards against poor decisions. But who do you suggest those people are? Who's that body that sets those criteria?
As much as I hate work groups. I mean, look, there's got to be some criteria. You guys are going to set them ipso facto if we don't, if we don't come to some agreement or the select board is going to, somebody, and if the select board wants to take on that responsibility, that's okay. But I think we're trying to get around to something that's got some controls associated with it, and just not say, here's 15 or 20 or $30 million.
I think we
come back and see us 10 years.
Criteria, please. I mean, if the trust is going to be evaluated on, success or failure, please give us the criteria.
Okay, so what's your recommendation?
Participate in a work group, but
I think it was clear that we need to achieve some shy list for the dollar. If we're not doing that, it's costing us $1 million, and that's not a good number.
Is this something that the consultant who came and presented to us can help with, developing the criteria?
Kevin could be helpful, to a discussion, but I think it kind of goes a little bit to the intention of the article as it was originally proposed. I mean, that article as it was proposed is talking about a $600,000+ average cost per shy unit. Again, I support what Mr. Morey is saying with regard to looking at buy down, but I think it'd be really tough to set that number right here, right now.
But that's why I'm suggesting that we hire a consultant to help us come to this set of criteria so that, again, it's a neutral person and that we're getting some level of expertise.
The consultant can aid in the discussion, but I think there's a lot of local knowledge, the realtor community and so forth, that is going to be instrumental in arriving at what that number is.
So I'll use the word facilitator. Can this person be a facilitator?
Not to adopt. Is there enough votes for that?
I'll just reiterate my comments of yesterday that I feel very strongly that the town of Nantucket, as a largest employer and representing the citizens of Nantucket, should not be involved in owning and operating real estate for citizens. I really feel strongly. I would say that town of Nantucket is the number one employer, and I can safely say that I bet you 60% of their employees, yes, are in a house, and 40%, which is predominantly the seasonal employees, look for all those houses just to operate the community. Once again, I to answer your question, I would not vote for $1. So that's where I'm coming from. Just because I'm a firm believer that it's an employer issue and not at the price of housing. The price of housing is what it is. People can't afford because they're working at jobs that can't afford to pay for it. And that's something that no one has discussed, at least this evening. And I think that's important to all of us to understand, and I applaud the work that went into it. But as a person who has been responsible and built 115 homes in a whole site of infrastructure, the reserves that we're putting down to buy us are de minimis in comparison. So in theory, the net operating income of the negative net operating income is probably another $200,000 to $300,000 more if we were putting aside monies to rebuild those capital investments later in life. So our deficit wouldn't be on an annual basis the way it was shown. It would be much higher. And I, for one, I look at that as we're taking money out of our tax roll and we're still not meeting the needs of, first and foremost, the employees of the town. So that's where I come from. And I don't mean to be an idiot for making this comment. I just want to remind ourselves, this is the Finance Committee and not the Morale Committee. Or moral, excuse me, the Moral Committee. We need morale.
So we don't have anything on the floor, do we?
Yeah,
We do.
We do?
We haven't voted.
It's $15 million, and I neglected in the last motion that I made to include that I want the money to be available for, excuse me, the restrictions piece isn't in the original. So let me figure out what that wording is. Interest in and/or restrictions on existing properties.
So if we have a cap, we have language changed that Stephen's looking for.
Yeah.
To make sure that the buy down provision is in.
Right, and obviously that's pending approval from bond counsel, but at least conceptually it's in there.
I'm sorry?
The income level language, so all of the housing units that are created are for people who earn between 30 and a 200% AMI.
Okay. We haven't put an exact number, like you said, we're not putting an exact number to buy down for the deed restriction.
I think Tucker rightly pointed out that we don't have the information available to know if 400,000 or 500,000 or whatever blended number, blended average is appropriate. I think it's probably in that range, but we don't have the information available. And David, your suggestion that somebody come up with criteria is great. We didn't identify who those people should be or when they should do it, but I agree somebody should, and it ought to be soon. It ought to be yesterday.
All right. So we have a restriction. We have restrictions. What we're saying, we're giving the guidance.
Can we vote on that?
Which is kind of open-ended still.
Obviously, we're losing our proponents. I think they've given up on us. So we can vote on this, that there would be, you said you had earlier said $15 million.
I did say 15. 15 is where we're at, and I
$15 million.
$15 million, and I asked if somebody who is about to vote this down, if you'd suggest another number. Peter said he wouldn't vote for a single dollar, so we have that.
Well, I also want to remind this committee that the capital committee hasn't even approached this. And as I said yesterday, there's $100 million of capital expense for fiscal 2020. The out years do not include close to $75 to $100 million of other items, Our Island Home, Senior Center, just to name two of the largest. And I think putting this ahead of some of those projects that we really need, we risk many more things. Once again, to remind ourselves, we're the Finance Committee, and we've looked at this, and this has just come to us within the last few months. And there's a whole committee that does a lot of work, meets many more times than this committee as your advocate and person who sits on that committee. And to sidestep, probably not with purpose, that committee is wrong, and it really needs to, and it fits into a program that we've spent a lot of time creating as mechanisms to watch our finances.
So I think that we answered directly to town meeting, and I don't think this issue's come up in the last couple of months. I think for several years, the town meeting has spoken that it wants housing solutions and it doesn't want density. And this is a solution to both of those issues. That's what I'm responding to. I appreciate that Capcom hasn't decided to put this in its program, but that doesn't negate the fact that this is a need. the fact that it's not on a spreadsheet for FY20 doesn't mean that it's not real.
Mr. Chairman, may I speak to the issue of criteria one last time?
Go ahead.
I'd like to say that one of the things we're doing in the Affordable Housing Trust that I perhaps wasn't as clear on is in our last meeting, we have identified a series of programs that I like to refer to as tools in our toolbox to look at the real estate landscape on Nantucket and try to figure out how best to achieve the goal of SHI List and creating a set of housing units that will be for year-rounders in perpetuity at affordable prices at various levels. And we have already decided as a committee to hire folks to help us identify criteria for those programs. So that process is, we're sort of your work group already. We're doing it. So thank you.
Thank you. All right.
I'd like to throw a number of $10 million and with the same restrictions, because like I said, if it works out and people do want it and town meeting is going to vote for it and they're going to vote for it at the ballot, then it always can be modified.
So you could vote, you could get behind 10.
Sure.
Denise?
5.
5. Peter? 0. Stephen, you're at 15 or you're higher?
0. No, I made the motion at 15, so we have
Cliff,
you'll be the swing at 10.
Cliff, what about 12? Can we get to 12?
Like I said, they can always change it.
Peter, where?
I'm still at the 15.
15, you're at 12. 0, 5, and 10.
Does it really make any difference what we come up with if it's going to be voted at the town meeting instead of us going over numbers?
You're absolutely right. In the grand scheme of things, probably not. However, I think it's important for us to indicate where we as a group are comfortable or not comfortable. I mean, I think we're not comfortable at 30. We're not comfortable at 20. We're comfortable somewhere 15 or south of that.
I mean, I would like to keep it at 15, but I'm willing to compromise.
We have to assume it'll never, if it's not working, it's never going to get to the 15 anyway.
Right, that's true.
See what happens in 2021. I don't mean that facetiously, but I really think that, if we do the database group that's been working hard, if they come back with a number of 17,000, thank you. I was going to say million. I almost stopped myself. We're in a different playing field. And I really honestly think it comes down to employers and what people are paid or lack thereof. And if we can't see that,
So maybe I can understand what you're saying. You're saying, obviously, if people had higher salaries, they could afford housing that they can not otherwise afford.
if employers would pay higher salaries to their employees, they wouldn't go through the...
What possible regulation could you have to enforce that?
You wouldn't.
No,
The only thing that would happen is the employer doesn't bring in the employees that they used to because the housing stock's gone or the rentals are enforced. There's economies.
Can we add another governor here to the expenditures where we're going to say the money can only be spent while we're south of the 10% shy number? So that if in FY21 we find out we're already above it, or whenever we get above it, this program's done, whether you've spent the money or not.
So a sunset provision, I know that you appreciate those.
Brings me back.
Yeah.
I could agree to 10 with a sunset provision.
Yeah.
Yep.
Look at that. We got unanimity.
Good job. Can you guys agree to 10? I think we've got...
10 would give you like 22 units, right?
Well, I think you got 4 votes for 10.
Okay, so I'm amending my motion to 10 with the sunset provision, the other language about the buy downs.
Can I add one thing? Stephen, if I may, how many FTEs do we need to add if we're going to add this to our employees? I know it's a loaded question. I'm sorry for asking, but I'd like to say something if we need to, that to reflect that if we're going to have some sort of control of real estate that we as a community own, I want it to come from.
Yeah, I don't know if we can put this in the motion, but in the comment, we should have that this $10 million should include all of the FTEs for 5 years.
Look,
10
well,
years.
And not based on what we were shown here at 36,000.
Based on real numbers, based on the actual
Thank
proposal
you.
in front of people.
Because that's why people need homes. Is you're paying them $36,000 and they can't find a home.
I understand.
Okay. So, a motion to adopt. Our comment to read $10 million with a sunset provision once we hit our 10% shy list. No further funds are to be expended with this program. That, what else did we have?
I don't have it quite exact, but adopt as written. I mean, your motion won't say that. I'll have to take out the wording. At main cons, I'm sorry. As written, 10 million, including interest in and or deed restrictions to the properties, with that bond council percentage language. I just jotted it down. The money can only be spent while we're under the 10%, which I need to get what that actual wording is. Is it the, it's not called the shy number. What? So the required subsidized housing inventory for the town of Nantucket or something like that. Okay. And then your comment would include that town resources, that the $10 million number should include what town resources are needed to implement and administer the program.
Perfect.
Something
Yes,
like that.
and the language needs to include the buy down. She got it. Okay, thank you.
What is?
Yeah,
You got it. You got it.
You said it already.
All right, so that's the motion. All okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Anybody opposed? Excuse me. Okay, great.
We have
Thank
good
you.
morale now.
Yeah, look at that. Now we're the morale committee. How's that?
Now, I understand. I'm just going to make the comment that for us, if we spent this much time on it, Sarah's going to have fun, and we don't even have Nantucket Inn. All right, so you want to bring back Article 6 and 21?
Well, actually, Mr. Chairman, we need to vote number 2 because we didn't vote it last night because we needed to add. There's an addition of $559 for unpaid bills for the sewer, so that total is $602 instead of the $43.
I'm not going to do it.
Okay. Is there?
No, I'm opposed to that.
That's right.
Okay.
On a moral basis.
Okay, so moved to make the changes to Brian.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. How about 6?
We would ask that you reopen our reconsider Article 6 because we need to add 2 funding additional transfers, one from free cash into debt service. If you remember at the special town meeting, we didn't have the quorum to act on financial articles, and we inadvertently left off $234,500 that was from Clean Water, the SRF that we needed to have the authority to pay this fiscal year. And the legal budget, given the extensive resources needed working in dealing with the marijuana issues, special town meeting, and the 40B is rapidly approaching deficit and will probably be there very shortly. So we'd like to add to the article to transfer from free cash to the legal budget $250,000. And we may need more. That's just what we think we need right now.
All right. So the first, can I have a motion to reconsider?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Any questions? Can I have a motion to approve the transfers as just, the additions to the transfers as just read to us?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. 21?
Article 21 would ask for a motion to reconsider so that we could make one change that I go through after the motion.
Can I have a motion to reconsider?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay.
So, as with the general fund at the special town meeting, the sewer needed to add some money to its operating budget to cover a small portion of state revolving fund loans that were financed during the year and needed to be paid. We're proposing to take $42,365,000 from transfer that from retained earnings. So that would be the addition on top of what was presented to you in the warrant for the airport.
Any discussion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
And there's one change that I didn't get a chance to discuss with you, Mr. Chairman. Article 28, which is the Affordable Housing Trust Fund article to come from CPC. We would ask that you reconsider the article because the amount that CPC actually did approve was $5 million, not the $3 million as we had written.
We haven't voted on that yet.
We haven't.
Oh, you
voted
haven't?
on it.
Okay,
No.
so then,
Throw the name back to 15
All right.
again.
So now are we?
Not yet. Sorry.
so I thought you had voted it. My apologies.
No.
But we did go back and look, and I did discuss this with Tucker, and because he was at that meeting, and they did make a motion to support a $5 million borrowing.
Okay.
What are they going to use the money for?
Well, CPC it's going to be a borrowing in the future that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund would be able to utilize. So if you remember, months ago, the select board said, please find $3 million to give to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We went to CPC and they graciously have committed future sums of money up to $500,000, which we've worked with Hilltop Securities. We could turn into a $5 million borrowing, which they did vote to approve. I think that some of that may be used to leverage properties that could be bought, not individual properties, but I'll let Tucker speak a little bit more to that, but that was presented and CPC did approve.
An editorial comment to the point that there are too many organizations trying to deal with this problem and it's not harmonized. And this is precisely the thing that I think gives many of us angst of putting more money into this.
Yes.
I think there's not a single person up here that doesn't think we don't have an affordable housing problem. We all may have our ways of solving it, but it is very frustrating. And we're going to commit $5 million here with no assurance that that these things are going to dovetail and are going to fit together in a coherent fashion. I mean, this is lunacy. And that's, we've got to develop the institutional capacity to deal with this. Otherwise, it's just fortunate that we've got the money.
Well, but I think that is the intention of what the CPC is trying to do here. They're saying rather than us as the CPC dole out, $300,000 to one organization to create one unit, we want to centralize the housing funding in one place, being the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, so that we can get the bigger bang for the buck.
I believe that was in the housing study.
Pardon me?
That was in the housing study. This was always one of Chris Glowacki's points.
I'd like to just point out that what they've committed to allocate is 20% of their current annual revenue, which is only double what they're obligated to give to affordable housing under their charter. So they're basically starting in fiscal 2021 saying, we will give $500,000 a year instead of our mandated $250,000, which is the 10% they're required to do. So, and they've already committed $750,000 this year, which exceeds that commitment that they've committed to in fiscal 2021. It's just about giving us the funds now so that we, again...
Yeah, I mean, they're levering it up. Yeah, I mean, I think they're leveraging it up, and that's fine.
Yeah. So
I think the broader point is that just, we've got all these organizations now that are trying to solve the housing problem, and there's no clear either policy direction as to how that's going to get accomplished. So
that is what the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is for, and that is what we're doing.
But do you have the policy direction to do that from the town?
In what, when you mean policy direction?
To be the organization for which all of this is funneled and all of the decisions are made. I mean, you don't have any staff. I think when we talk about, the maturity, the institutional capacity to run something is what we're not seeing. And that's the frustrating thing.
There's nothing to run if you don't have the money to buy it in the first place.
Okay, you're getting the money.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And in the past, we've said no money because we haven't figured out how you're going to run it.
Right.
And you're getting a lot better. You're getting closer.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're going to get up to $10 million, another 5 from the affordable housing or from the CPC. And who knows where the 10 is at the end of town meeting, and no institution to run it. And for those of us that are comfortable, or those of us that have run organizations, this is the great frustration. And, we don't see, we know how stretched, the town manager and her staff are with all of these other things that Peter talks about. This is a complex operation, and we've got to have the capacity. Otherwise, I don't personally think that we're doing fulfilling our fiduciary responsibility to the town by continuing to spend money.
May I say a couple things?
Please.
Number one, I couldn't agree more about having the infrastructure internally, administratively, to handle all of this. And it's not very robust right now. However, Tucker basically is the staff person to the Affordable Housing Trust. We are internally discussing right now using some of this money from CPC and existing funds that the trust already has to create more of an administrative structure for the Affordable Housing Trust. They do have their strategic plan, which is, I think, done or just about done, which is going to be discussed by the select board, I think, next week. And it hopefully will include some element of that. So I want to just reassure you a little bit, because no one's more concerned about that than me, probably, because I don't know how I'm going to manage it. Thank God Tucker is surfaced to help with all this, but he needs help too. So we're hoping that in the next, half a year, that administrative structure will be more developed.
Thank you.
Good.
We're delighted to hear that.
That's credibility.
So are we trying to vote on Article 28? Is that what we're doing?
We have to vote. We're not going to try.
Okay. I want to just say that I think this is the first year since I've been on the committee that we didn't see a report from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund about what they spent the money on last year. So if I missed that, or if we didn't,
you didn't miss it.
But this would be the first year that we didn't get one.
Well, that may be my.
Please don't add to my joy about how we're approving stuff, Joanna. Please
Sorry,
This is not the time to bring that up, Joanna.
I thoroughly enjoy the report every year, and I look forward to it. Okay, and if we are going to make a motion on Article 28, I would suggest that we make a motion that includes providing support for administration, because I agree with everything that Libby just said. I think it's critical, and I think that this goes to supporting what we're trying to achieve.
Let's just make the motion as it is, and then we can add a comment.
Okay.
Okay. Just to be clear, that it would have to be in a comment, because you can't use borrowed funds for annual operating costs. So we want to make sure that doesn't get into the motion. So.
Got it. But they have other money in their bank account. I know they do.
All right.
All right.
Can I get a motion to
accept Article 28?
Approve.
Approve.
Second. Any further discussion?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. No, we're not. Hang in there. Hang in there, Cliff.
Yeah,
Well, can I finish? Would you like me to finish out the articles?
Yeah.
Okay, I have us not having voted on 79, which is a home rule petition, which is the reintroduction of the housing bank real estate transfer fee, which we've had. So I would say that it's pro forma unless there's some desire not to resubmit it, but I can't imagine that we're going there. So, okay.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion?
Just that we have the sunset language. in there? Because it wasn't in last time this came up for discussion.
It is or is not?
It was not the last time this came up for discussion a month or so ago. So I just want to make sure that the motion that we're making includes the language that's at the State House right now that has the sunset provisions.
What has been submitted to the State House has the sunset provision, and I think the issue has been, I think last year as well, that
just copy and
the
paste it in one
original version, the sunset was added on the floor of the original town meeting, and the original version for some reason keeps getting picked up for what you guys see for the warrant. But I can assure you what has been submitted to the state has the sunset.
And I've seen that. I just want to make sure that our motion matches what's already at the State House.
Was the sunset version in last year's motion?
Yes. Yeah, I think it was in the motion, but not in the article.
Okay, would you like to make
I made the motion to
Yeah.
adopt this.
Second.
It's been seconded and all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Conveyance of easement of Waite Drive on Waite Drive,
What number? Oh, 80.
81.
Move to adopt.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And acquisition and conveyance, not shop sewer lines and easements. Article 82. That's an real estate acquisition and conveyance.
Move to adopt.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I believe that 86 and 87 were voted, which is stabilization and free cash and that was to take no action. Okay, Libby.
Yeah, just two quick things. I think you already, see, when I was doing these motions, I didn't really keep track of what you already voted on. 73, that the cannabis policy. There's been some discussion on our end with some board members about referring this to the select board.
Correct?
If you're,
We voted it. We voted not to adopt.
Not to adopt.
right, but would you be in favor of reconsidering that and moving to refer the proposed establishment of the committee to the select board?
No.
Okay.
But the select board wants this
She
referred
does.
back to them?
Yeah. Me personally, no.
Okay, I'll make a motion to reconsider.
There's a motion to reconsider.
Second.
Okay, discussion?
I thought that. Okay, can I just
None.
ask a
All
question?
right, let's just vote to reconsider. We've got a motion
Okay,
and,
sure.
and a
We'll
second.
reconsider it.
All in favor of reconsideration?
Aye.
Okay.
Opposed, nay.
I
Okay.
propose it.
Are you proposing that we go to take no action?
My proposal was to refer the proposed establishment of a committee to the select board, but you don't have to do that. If you want to say no action, that's fine, because I think the select board's going to make a comment anyway.
I guess.
So excuse me, what are you suggesting that we do? I don't think there's any appetite to adopt it.
No, she's suggesting that the motion is to refer.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll make that motion. Motion to refer the proposed establishment of a committee to the select board.
Second.
Any discussion?
I only just kind of thought we were not voting on creating any additional town committees that required resources.
But,
We're not.
but the select board wants this one. They've asked for this to be referred to them. So, if you want to do it, go for it.
Okay. Anything
Okay.
else?
74, I just wanted to.
We need to vote.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Aye.
All in favor?
Nay.
Hey.
I gotta stay
Okay.
consistent.
Okay, thank you. The 74, I just wanted to bring to your attention that, do you want to say if there's any costs associated with it that the town is not responsible? Or
That's the
do we just
way
leave it alone because it doesn't say that anyway?
No, I think we just leave it.
Okay.
My battery died.
We're not paying for it if it comes in.
I don't blame you. So the final thing is we never finished where we were going to end up with a bicycle thing. We threw in the towel yesterday. That one.
Somebody want that referred to them also?
Yeah, let's give that to the select board.
Where's the board of selectmen to find the money within
A safety committee.
No.
What
we
was our
didn't.
motion originally?
We didn't make one.
Somebody said move to take no action, and then it was, you ended the comment.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we
I know,
voted
that
to
was
end the
done.
comment after
Period.
Peter's thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's right. We did. All right.
did.
I
Good.
acquiesced to the period and then we moved on.
All right.
That's right. We dropped the rest of the sentence.
Okay.
We debated risk for a while.
We just saved ink.
Are we done? As far as you know.
I'm finished.
Okay.
I have to go have the spaghetti.
It's baked macaroni now.
Second.
So before we adjourn, Cliff, you can't adjourn us yet. Before we adjourn, we have a meeting on the 25th, and it's going to be at 4:00, and it's going to be here. So that's an added meeting because we've got to do the town pier and take care of whatever else might be necessary.
If I can get,
Yeah, if we can
if I
get
can
the
get Dorothy by then. I contacted her
24th?
today and haven't heard back.
Monday the
Good.
25th.
Thank you. That's better.
So
Okay.
yes, if we can get it done by then.
Oh, yeah, I won't be here.
Cliff, would you like to adjourn the meeting, please?
Second.
Thank you very much for all your work, guys.